Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to Exploring Reality, where we show you the rational side of the Christian faith. Today I have a special guest with me. His name is Dr. David A. Falk. Dr. Falk, what's going on?
I'm here and I'm ready to take your questions.
Awesome. Well, let's just jump right into things, just because we only have an hour here. I know you got another interview with Sentinel Apologetics after the fact, so I just want to be cautious of your time. Why don't you just start off by telling us about yourself?
Okay, well, I'm born and raised in Vancouver, Canada. I'm still here today. I hold 4 graduate degrees, and one of them is a Ph.D. in Egyptology. The area of the focus of my research is Ramesside Egypt, and particularly ritual processional furniture and how it relates to the study of the Ark of the Covenant. And as an aside, because of that, I also do work on the relationship between, say, the Israelite Exodus and their sojourn in Egypt.
Wow, that's a lot. Okay.
That's a lot, yes.
So I'm kind of a layperson when it comes to this stuff. If you've seen my videos, I kind of a popularizer of the philosophical arguments for theism.
Cool. We need that.
Yeah. So when it comes to, I guess, evidence, the word evidence when it comes to this topic, what does that actually mean? Are there different types of evidence?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Every historical discipline has its own standards of evidence.
Okay.
If you say look at modern or early modern history, like for example the Napoleon era, say early medieval Europe, that's that sort of era. That tends to be more a deductive, direct evidence kind of discipline. So they rely primarily on direct evidence and deductive methodology. Now, in my particular specialization, which is in ancient history, we don't have that luxury. There isn't a lot of direct evidence to be had for anything. So we tend to use more indirect evidence and inductive methodologies. So when we gather evidence together as ancient historians, we tend to do it as in clusters of evidence that are then used to make an induction. Now, if you go back even further to say prehistory, you don't even have the luxury then of indirect evidence. You have to go then to what is an abductive case, or what is a best case scenario given the evidence that they have. So every historical discipline has its own standards of evidence.
So what would count, I guess, as evidence when it comes to, for instance, the reliability of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch in specific, I guess?
What we would do when we say look at the evidence for the Pentateuch is we would try to compare it to other evidence and other texts that we find in the ancient Near East and see if what it says is consistent with the account that we find, say, in the biblical texts.
Gotcha. Okay. And so what kind of work do you view the Pentateuch as? Is it historical, allegorical? What would you say?
It's a mix of many works.
Okay.
Okay, it's a blend of different genres. And that's sort of our task as exegetes is, say, the first task that we have is to understand the grammar of the text and then the genre of the text. There are dozens of genres, and every book in the Bible is a blend of genres. So we might find, say, prophetic or poetics or allegory or history. We might find some myth or a parable. We even find a few cases of, say, temple dedication inscriptions. Inscriptions that sort of are like one-off genres.
Gotcha.
Like we might find them only once or twice in the Pentateuch, but we find them all over the ancient Near East.
That's pretty cool. Okay, so when it comes to the Pentateuch, then, would you say it's a reliable piece of work, at least when it comes to the books and the parts of the books, I guess, even that consider themselves or present themselves as historical?
As the books that do present themselves historical, I would say that it is consistent with what the evidence we have from the rest of the ancient Near East. whether that's archaeological or textual.
Okay. Awesome. So this is where I guess things are going to get a little bit meatier. What is your view on the biblical Moses?
My view on the biblical Moses is that he was a real living historical person.
Okay.
Now that's impossible to prove. Okay, I'm going to lay that right out there. You can't prove that Moses was a historical person.
Okay.
Because we don't have any corroborating texts. However, when we look at, say, for example, labor movements and labor strikes in the late Bronze Age, like we have an example of the labor strike at Deir el-Medina. And in that particular labor strike, there's a Magi who basically leads the strikers. He acts as an advocate. He's got the trust of the people, but yet standing with the local authorities. So he's sort of the mediator. He's the focal point for the relaying the strikers' grievances to, say, the mayor of Thebes. So if we look, say, at what happened, say, with the Exodus and the slavery of the people, Moses fits very, very well with, they say, that advocate role. Yes, he is genetically an Israelite, but he was raised among royalty, among the upper class of Egyptian society. And as a member of the royal family, he would have standing to have an audience before the king. He fits very, very well in that sort of advocate role that we would see at, say, Deir el-Medina. So the fact is that the Moses character would be exceptionally consistent with the sort of labor cause and effects that we would see with the Egyptian sojourn and resulting Exodus. So it would be really incredulous if some sort of Moses figure did not exist. If these people just sort of, as a gestalt or a meme just picked up and left without any leader at all, that's probably not going to happen. These sort of large migration movements do need a leader or a focal point for that person to for that event to take place. So while there's no direct historical evidence for a Moses, it would be very, very inconsistent and very difficult to conceive of an Exodus event without a Moses.
Gotcha. So what I just heard, and almost in essence, is we don't really have proof of a biblical Moses other than the Pentateuch itself.
Yeah.
But it'd be very hard to conceive of the Exodus happening without a Moses-like leader in the first place.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
So what we have here is not mythology. Mm-hmm. What we have here is hagiography. What
is that?
Hagiography is what's often called the lives of saints. Okay. Now, one of the distinctions between mythology and hagiography is mythology is untrue. It's a story that's made up with maybe elements of truth, but the details of themselves are not in and of itself true. But in the case of hagiography, there's some truth to it, some core person. And it's usually that there's some sort of unexpected detail that is confirmed, which then leads credence to the existence of the person behind the event. And what we got in the case of Exodus is, at the very, very least, we've got hagiography, because we have all sorts of corroborating facts to the Exodus event.
Gotcha. Cool. So I guess this kind of leads into my next few questions. Some people dispute, for instance, that there was Jewish or Israelite slavery in Egypt. Do we have any evidence of this? And what is it?
Okay, that's a loaded question for one reason.
Okay.
Is that there was no Jews or Israelites prior to the Exodus.
That's why I was kind of trying to be careful with my wording there. I didn't know what else to call them.
Well, we call them Asiatics.
Okay.
They're Amorites. They're Asiatics. They're sons of Jacob. They're a mixed multitude,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't actually become Israelites
Yeah.
until the Exodus itself.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't become Jews until sometime after that.
Okay.
Okay. Judaism is a later term.
Yeah.
It's a later term. They are Israelites when they leave on the Exodus. And that whole mixed multitude becomes incorporated into the 12 tribes. They become grafted in.
Okay. So what would we
Israel, the nation of Israel is really, in a lot of sense, is the first multicultural nation.
Okay.
It's a melting pot nation. Very similar to like the United States. You know, many people from many countries immigrated to the United States, and they all became Americans.
So you're saying Israel...
Many nationalities are part of the mixed multitude, and they all become melted together, become Israel.
Interesting.
You have at Avaris an incredibly diverse population. You have Magi, Nubians, Egyptians, Libyans, other Amorites and other Canaanites, Cushites, even Magi.
So what would we expect to see?
Now, to answer the other question,
Yeah.
Yes, we do find slavery at Avaris.
Okay. So...
And it happens under the reign of Ahmose I. When Ahmose I, the first king of Dynasty 18, conquers Avaris. He treats Avaris as if it were a foreign city. And he enslaves at least a good part of the population there. And some of those slaves are given to his soldiers as rewards. But of course, being the king, he keeps the lion's share. He always keeps the lion's share. Because he's king.
Yep. So what kind of evidence would we expect to see of Amorites, I guess, being slaves?
Okay, well, we know that the vast majority of the Semitic population was Amorite, and that's because they left evidence of Amoritic imperfective names. Okay. So this is a kind of construction of name that's very distinct to Semitic cultures, particularly Amorites.
Gotcha.
So it usually starts with an imperfective verb and ends with the name of a deity. So that's what makes those names distinct.
Gotcha. So then do we have any, at this point, again, my history isn't where yours is, obviously, but would we expect to see any signs or evidence of Yahweh worship?
We find no evidence of Yahweh worship.
Okay.
But we wouldn't expect to find signs of Yahweh worship.
Why is that?
Because the Israelites were polytheistic pagans.
Mm-hmm.
And even the Bible portrays them as polytheistic pagans before Moses.
Yep.
Moses brings Yahweh worship with him from Midian.
Gotcha.
That's where he brings it from.
Okay.
He's a god. Yahweh is a god that the Israelites never knew by name when he brought them out of Egypt. What we find among, say, the Asiatics living at Avaris is they're worshiping many gods. They're even worshiping gods from Canaan, gods like Astarte, Resheph, and Baal. They even build a temple to Baal there.
Interesting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm learning a lot. I read through some of your work. I tried binging it as much as I can in preparation for this, and I'm still learning a lot. My gosh. So let's get to the more intensive thing, I guess. Everybody who's watching this right now wants to know, is there evidence of the Exodus? And yes. I guess this is where you're going to be talking for a really long time.
I'll keep it short to a few bullet points. Okay. One of the major things is Avaris itself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Everyone and almost everyone recognizes that Avaris is the city that the sons of Jacob and the mixed multitude lived in prior to the Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the Exodus, they're also picking up people along the way from Pithom, from Sukkoth, even some from Paramses. So, but their central city was Avaris, and it's the largest Semitic city west of the Orontes, which is a river in Syria.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That city is completely abandoned except for its shipping port in the early to mid Dynasty 19. Just completely abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
After that, it's used for tombs for the adjacent city of Paramses.
Gotcha.
So the whole site is abandoned except for its port. Where did all those people go?
That's a good question. So
they didn't move to Paramses.
Yeah.
Because Paramses was a fully occupied city already at that point. They didn't go there. They had to go somewhere.
So what else would we expect to see, I guess, about with all this going on?
Okay, well, the second piece of evidence would be, say, the Merneptah Stele. So let's say we've got as one bookend the Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the other bookend would be for our evidence would be the Merneptah Stele. Now, the Merneptah Stele dates to the 5th regnal year of Merneptah, who is the successor of Ramses II.
Okay.
That stela mentions Israel being in Canaan. So that sort of is the other bookend. That limits how late the Exodus can be.
Okay.
Because they're already in Canaan at that point. Now, interesting, the geopolitics of the Merneptah Stele show us that Israel had not yet conquered Canaan. Israel was one tribe sort of sharing and conquering the land there, because Merneptah also encounters the Hurrians, who were a nomadic people in northern what's today northern Israel.
Okay.
And they're one of the people that the Israelites are supposed to drive out. So we know that when the Merneptah Stele takes place, Israel had not completed that process of driving out the indigenous population.
Interesting. Okay.
So we've got that on the other end. And then we have, as sort of the third data point, is the death of Ramses II's firstborn. Now, it's very unusual for a king not to lose his, firstborns kind of come and go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is kind of a little strange right here, that the firstborn of Ramses actually survives into adulthood.
Why is that strange?
Because the death rate, infant mortality rate, is so high in Egypt.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's very, very high in Egypt. So Ramses was very, very convenient for us, because he also kept track of all his children, all 120 of his children. And they were often put on parade.
Okay.
At like temple ceremonies, and you see inscriptions of their names. So they're pretty easy to keep track of, which is really, really wonderful for us, because we know a little bit about Ramses II's firstborn and who he was. About the time that the Israelites leave Avaris, this firstborn son dies. And his name was Amenhotep. And this happens around Ramses II's 25th regnal year. So we can pinpoint the Exodus to sometime at or after, say, 1265 BC.
Okay.
So roughly into Ramses II's 25th regnal year.
So Ramses II would be the pharaoh of the Exodus.
He would be the pharaoh of the Exodus. And it would make sense, too, because he had moved his capital city from Thebes, 500 miles away, to Paramses, which was only 1.25 miles from Avaris.
Okay.
This gives us what we call propinquity.
What is that?
Propinquity is what's called closeness in time, closeness in space. Let's say you have actors on a stage, Okay? If you want to show the drama, all those actors have to be on stage at the various times. You can't have one of your actors, say, at a bus station 12 miles away, because the audience wouldn't be able to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's what's called propinquity, having all the necessary people nearby. Now, in the book of Exodus, what we have is Moses meeting the elders of Israel, of the sons of Jacob. Then he goes and meets Pharaoh. Pharaoh goes and tells the taskmasters to make the work hard. The taskmasters go back to the elders and make things harsh.
Mm-hmm.
Moses goes back to the elders and back to Pharaoh, and so on and so on and so on. There's this sort of rapid interlocutor between the various figures in the Exodus that just wouldn't be feasible if the capital was 500 miles away.
Gotcha.
You get on a boat, a week later you arrive.
Yeah. So, are there any other critical data points, I guess, to the Exodus that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, those are the main ones.
Okay.
Those are the main points.
So,
but there's also a lot of little things too when we talk about the Exodus. Stuff such as cultural data.
So what would that mean?
Those don't pinpoint a date of the Exodus, but what they do is they lend support by showing the consistency of the text.
Okay.
Stuff such as the cultural practice of putting long cylindrical objects in, say, in basically over your shoulders in a garment. Now, why this is interesting is because in ancient Egypt, bread bowls were long, tall cylinders. In Canaan, they're low, flat bowls. Completely different functionality for baking bread. In the Exodus account, we have the taskmasters beating and then questioning. That order of beating and then questioning is something we find that's typical of ancient Egyptian, say, policing and interrogation methods. We don't find that much elsewhere. We find the birthing bricks of the midwives. That was something also very, very Egyptian. The chain of gold for Joseph. The development of the chariot as a device of, say, Hyksos mobile supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
The mummification of Jacob, where the time frames are, like, for example, the 40 days of the preparation of the mummy. That's only been recently confirmed.
Huh.
And the 70 days of mourning. That's also been recently confirmed. So there's a lot of these extra little fine cultural points, like the toponyms.
Mm-hmm.
The route of the Exodus is very specific to a time frame, which happens to be during the reigns of Seti I and Ramses II.
Toponyms are names, right?
Place names.
Okay.
They're place names.
So for the audience, what exactly is a place name?
A place name is basically what we call any sort of city.
Okay.
Like, for example, the city of Ramses. In Egyptian, it's P. Ramses, okay. House of Ramses, literally House of Ramses II.
Interesting. Okay. And
because we find these also in the Egyptian texts, and that's how we can compare them.
Mm-hmm. Because
what was called P. Usur Ma'are Seteben Re Ramses Mariaman is the throne name of Ramses II.
Oh.
It's the throne name.
That's pretty cool.
So that's how we can tell who Ramses, the city of Ramses, was named after.
Gotcha.
Pithom, also called Etham. Etham is just Pithom with the P dropped off. And P is the word pair or house. So Pithom is renamed after house of the god, creation god Atum.
Mm-hmm.
And it was renamed that when Ramses II built a temple to Atum there. The fortress of Migdol was built initially by Ramses II's father, Seti I.
Gotcha.
We also find these other town names in the late Ramesside miscellanies, which are a set of teaching papyri that took court documents and used them as scribal exercises. Mm-hmm. So we find the names of towns like Baal Safan, Pihahi Roth. Even the Sea of Reeds. Even the Sea of Reeds.
Sea of Reeds.
The Yam Suf, the Red Sea, shows up in Egyptian documents. Mm-hmm. It shows up in the in Ostraca that places it between Pi-Ramses and the fortress city of Charu. Mm-hmm. We also find it in the Papyrus Anastasia III, where it's called both, say, the Payam, the sea, and the Patufi, the reeds. And Tufi is the Egyptian word that is borrowed into Hebrew as Suf. So we also find a lot of Egyptian lexicography, mm-hmm. Egyptian words in the Hebrew texts, like reeds, mm-hmm. like linen. And then you get into personal names. There's a lot of Egyptian personal names among the Israelites.
So you would say that there's a lot of Egyptian cultural and language influence that we can see.
There's a lot of Egypt in the Pentateuch.
Interesting.
A lot of Egypt in the Pentateuch. We may not always find a lot of, say, the Israelites in Egypt, but we find a lot of Egypt in the Pentateuch.
Okay.
A lot more than would be explained if it had been written in, say, 5th, 6th century Babylon.
Okay. So I kind of want to shift some gears a little bit here. Mm-hmm. There's two questions that a lot of people have when it comes to the trip of the Exodus itself, mm-hmm. right? A lot of people will ask about evidence about them wandering the desert for 40 years.
Yeah.
There's I read something about a theory that you would actually expect to see human excrement or something like that, right? And so me not knowing anything about this kind of stuff, I guess I just want to give you the stage.
Right, I'll tell you why you won't find that there.
Okay.
The environmental conditions of the Sinai in the late Bronze Age is not the same as it was today.
Okay.
It's just simply not the same. Today, the Sinai is a pure desert.
Okay.
It's totally a desert. Back in the late Bronze Age, it was a savanna.
So what would be the difference between the two?
It had trees and grass.
Okay.
The Sinai had trees and grass, which means it had wildlife.
Yep. Water?
It had birds. It had some water.
Okay.
Yeah, it had some water. Not a lot of water. Mm-hmm. It would be like kind of savanna in Africa.
Okay.
Okay, so you are gonna be hard up for water, but there will be water there. Pastoralists from Midian used to graze their flocks in Sinai. That's how Moses encountered the Midianites. Mm-hmm. Was as they were pasturing their flocks in the Sinai. Well, you don't pasture your flocks there if there's no water and there's no grass. Mm-hmm. It would make no sense if they pastured their flocks there. Mm-hmm. But back in the late Bronze Age, there was grass, there was almond trees, there was acacia trees, there was quail. So, and there would have been insects. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, dung beetles. Lots and lots of dung beetles. What happened to the human excrement? Take a good guess.
Yep.
The dung beetles got to it.
Interesting. So do we have any evidence of the trip at all?
We wouldn't have much evidence of the trip because, first of all, they didn't hang around in one place too long. Okay. The very most I think they hang around is like 1 year at Mount Sinai. And the problem is the Sinai Peninsula is a huge place. Mm-hmm. It's huge. Finding a campsite, an ephemeral campsite like that would be really, really difficult to do.
Okay.
The second is, how would we tell it from, say, other pastoralists, like the Bedouin? Well, if they herded sheep and goats, well, isn't that what the Bedouin herd? Sheep and goats. How would we tell sheep and goat remains from any other Bedouin? It's not like they're making a lot of pots in the middle of a savanna. So we aren't going to even find a lot of pot shards. Okay. Clothing was valuable. They would have even kept scraps of that.
Cool. So
there isn't much possibility that we're going to actually find anything out there. I mean, the few Bedouin sites we do find have been occupied by Bedouin for centuries. And it's that accumulation of centuries that leaves a footprint.
Interesting. So
it's a preservation problem.
Yeah. So we wouldn't actually expect to see any evidence of this, and if we did find anything, we wouldn't really be able to tell the difference between it being what we would now call the Israelites and any other group, I guess, that they passed along.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to tell from any other, say, Bedouin.
Okay.
Because they're, at that point, the Israelites are doing the transition from being city dwellers, which what they were at Avaris, to becoming pastoralists.
So what exactly is a pastoralist?
They're shepherds.
Okay.
They're abandoning a city lifestyle to pursue a shepherd's lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So one of the questions that always comes up, at least when I'm talking to people about the Exodus, is people like to say that there's no evidence of a mass Exodus, that a huge group of people couldn't have done it.
Despite the fact that an entire city just picks up and leaves.
Right.
No evidence at all.
So
whole city just picks up and goes, but there's no evidence.
How do you answer that question? Like, how many people were in the Exodus, do you think? And
well, okay, there's a huge range of opinion here.
Okay.
And scholars and skeptics of good faith on both sides of this issue. You know, those that deny a Exodus to those that say hold to a biblical Exodus will vary dramatically on how many people they were.
Okay.
Just about everyone agrees that it wasn't 2 million.
Okay.
Everyone agrees about this, pretty much. There's a couple holdouts still that still think that it's 2 million.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really not a reasonable assumption at this point.
Where does that number even come from?
That number comes from an estimate.
Okay.
So in one of the biblical texts, it talks about 600,000 men of age 20 to 60 of fighting age. Mm-hmm. And then what they do is they add children below that, older men above that, and then add the women.
Okay.
And that gives you roughly 1.82 million.
Gotcha.
Okay. Now, there are problems with that reading. Lots and lots and lots of problems, and not the least of which is the archaeology itself.
Yeah.
But the other problem is too that some of those numbers might be idealized. There might have been shifts in the lexicography. For example, the whole idea that 1,000 might actually represent a clan or a contingent. I'm not exactly swayed by that, but I think it's a possibility, and it's a possibility worth looking into.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those sort of issues that is going to take a lot of really serious, almost doctoral level, dissertation level kind of study.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be this is going to become somebody's 5-year PhD project.
Yeah.
Because it's that kind. I mean, kind of like Stele when he reconciled the numbers of the Israelite kings, the kings of Israel with the kings of Judah. It used to be thought that was impossible until Stele, as his doctoral dissertation, figured it out.
Huh.
But it sort of takes that kind of commitment to figure it out. And that's what's going to happen with this, I think, is somebody is going to figure it out, but they're going to do it as a doctoral dissertation.
Gotcha.
It's not something that's going to be resolved by a single peer-reviewed article.
Mm-hmm.
At least not likely.
Yeah.
It's going to take some real serious hard work and study to figure it all out. But right now, the opinions are sort of across the board. There are people who think it's as low as 10,000, and I tend to be on the high end of this.
Okay.
I tend to think it's in the hundreds of thousands.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the reason is because I use demographics to make my estimate. And I don't consult the text here as much as I consult the archaeology. The site of Avaris is 250 hectares. Given the population density of, say, other Semitic cities, earlier Semitic cities, like, for example, Lehun,
Mm-hmm.
the population density is 800 persons per hectare. We can estimate that the population of Avaris is around 100,000-ish. Now, even if it was below 100,000, once they start picking up a couple 10, 20,000 from, say, Sukkoth, and another 40,000 from, say, Pithom, and a few more stragglers along the way, that's going to balloon into the 100,000s anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel pretty safe in that estimate of saying it's at least 100,000 or more. But I would concur with everyone else in saying it wasn't 2 million.
Okay. Cool. So
the site's big. It's not that big.
So you would say, can you repeat the number one more time, just so that way I can dedicate that to my memory?
I think it's over 100,000.
Over 100,000.
Yeah. But I'm on the high end of this range.
Okay.
Most of my colleagues do not go that high. I'm an outlier here, and I admit it.
Yeah. So,
but my approach to this is different too.
Yeah. So I guess I have a few more questions left before we go to the open Q&A. We got about 9 minutes left before we do that. You're doing some work, right, on the historicity of the plagues, you said, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm pretty sure a lot of people are wondering that first. So I'm not expecting a full breakdown, I guess, on that.
And you won't get it either.
Yeah, because you're still working on it.
Still working on it.
Let's talk about, at least on a surface level, what about the 10 plagues or even the crossing of the Red Sea? What do we see? Is there anything?
We do see references to this kind of events in Egyptian literature.
Okay.
We find these sort of events being referenced in Middle Kingdom works as being sort of bad events that are brought on by the chaos in Egypt, by bad administration, essentially, from previous regimes.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very typical of, say, political literature of the very early 12th dynasty. So we see references in, say, Nefertiti, Ipuwer, the sun being blotted out, the river turning to blood, chaos in the land, Semites, Asiatics, swarming and becoming wealthy at the expense of Egyptians. But these pieces of literature are also usually triumphalist in nature too, basically saying that, hey, now that was in the past. Now we got this brand new, shiny government and administration that's saving the day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those works don't actually refer to the Exodus event, but they do allude to it.
Okay,
and they're written as prophecies of future events to come that are to be fulfilled. So what happens is, come, say, the beginning of Dynasty 18, where you've had a long rule of Asiatics, and they're defeated by a new king, Ahmose I, a lot of native Egyptians say, oh, wow, this literature foretold the coming of Ahmose.
Mm-hmm.
He's our new liberator from these vile Asiatics. Okay? So they reinterpret that prophecy once. But then what happens is, during Dynasty 19, you get the plagues of Egypt, and people are going, wait, what's going on here? How do we process this?
Mm-hmm.
So they go back to that same literature, and then they see these events being sort of foretold in this old Middle Kingdom literature, long after the political events that created that literature are forgotten, it's being reinterpreted as prophecy.
Interesting.
And so when it comes to, say, the splitting of the Red Sea, which the Egyptians would have interpreted as water magic, pumped up by this prophecy that a king would come and defeat the Asiatics, and given this sign that looks like the gods of the river have blessed Ramses, of course he sends his army right in there. So what we have is God using the Egyptians' own cultural context against them.
I didn't think
it's a trap.
Interesting.
And the interesting thing is that the Pentateuch, the Exodus account, says explicitly that when they leave the Wadi Tumilat, they don't go south and exit. They go north, where they're sort of wandering between the fortresses to lure Pharaoh.
Interesting.
So it's knowingly a trap. And the Israelites are the bait. And all these fortresses are sending reports back to Ramses saying, hey, these people are wandering the desert lost.
Interesting.
And Pharaoh can't resist that.
So you brought up something, you brought up the Red Sea. Is that different than the Red Sea?
It's the actual translation.
Okay.
The Hebrew is Yam Suf, Sea of Reeds.
Okay.
It was translated by the Septuagint as the Red Sea. So it's a Greek. Red Sea is an English translation of a Greek translation of a Hebrew word.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it the same body of water?
It would be the same body of water. And it would actually be one of the lakes. It's not the Red Sea of today. We have to keep that in mind. The Red Sea actually had changed a number of times in history because geography, the names of geography don't stay the same over time. Like, for example, in the New Testament times, Arabia referred to Sinai. Not just to say what we call today Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
It included the Sinai. So by the time of, say, the Greek geographers, nobody really knew where the Red Sea was anymore, or the Red Sea, because that branch of the Nile had dried up hundreds of years previously. But what we know as the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, it's indicated because these are reeds. These are the same reeds that were used to make baskets. Okay, these are freshwater reeds like papyrus. So it had to be either a freshwater or a brackish body of water. And we know, given its placement in the geography specified in Egypt, that it was one of the lakes of the Pelusiac estuary, near, in and around modern Suez and Ismailia.
Okay.
So on the northwestern side of the Sinai, pretty close to the actual Mediterranean. In fact, it emptied out into the Mediterranean.
Wow.
I think you have a map that shows that route.
Do you want me to bring that up?
Yeah, sure.
All right, it's up on the screen now. And so
the red line would have been the route of the Exodus.
Okay. And so anything particular you want to talk about on this map is the starting point, I'm assuming, is Avaris.
Is Avaris. And they basically cut down to Sukkoth, enter the Wadi Tumilat, pick up some more people at Pithom, and then they exit the Wadi. And at that point is when they decide to go north instead of south. They go north. They do essentially a circle.
Yeah.
they do a circle between Pi-Hahirote, Migdol, and Bel-Savan.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, they're boxed in there. At least they appear boxed in. They got the sea to the backs, the desert behind them, Bel-Savan and Migdol on the other side, and then Pharaoh's chariots coming from the north. It looks like a trap. Mm-hmm. It smells like a trap.
Yep.
But a trap for whom? So then they cross one of those lakes in the estuary, and then they travel down the west side of the Sinai after that.
Mm-hmm. This is very helpful, I guess, especially for just visualizing what the trip would look like. And so is this map, I guess, what you did, is this accepted amongst your peers as to what?
It's pretty close to accepted.
Okay. Interesting.
At least as far as those who would still accept an Exodus.
Yeah, of course.
Which ironically is more accepted in my own field, which is Egyptology, than it is in biblical studies.
Interesting. So you're saying Egyptologists tend to accept the Exodus more than like Old Testament historians?
On a percentage basis, yes.
How fascinating. Well, we're at that 15-minute mark, but now I kind of want to know why that is.
Why that is because most Egyptologists are historians.
Mm-hmm.
And in many ways, we're not saddled with the same theoretical frameworks that, say, people in biblical studies are.
Okay.
We were never sort of, as part of our intellectual tradition, we were never saddled with, say, the documentary hypothesis or biblical minimalism.
Okay.
We were more or less free to just look at the facts for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason why most Egyptologists still reject the Exodus is because they don't care.
Mm-hmm.
It's not of interest.
Interesting.
Most Egyptologists' view of the Bible is, well, why would you want to look at that when there's so much interesting stuff in Egypt?
Fair enough.
That is the attitude, though.
Yeah.
That is the attitude. Why are you looking at that boring Hebrew stuff?
Mm-hmm.
There's all these cool hieroglyphs elsewhere.
Yep. Well,
they do have a point, but
yeah. How fascinating. I didn't know that about Egyptologists. I just thought the common view was that the Exodus didn't happen and there's no evidence for it, but I never really thought about separating, I guess, Egyptologists and...
Well, I mean, Egyptologists, too, you have to understand, too, that a lot of them are actually devout Muslims as well. And devout Muslims believe in an Exodus.
Yep. Okay.
Now, the more, say, anti-Semitic Muslims will deny an Exodus, even though it's in their own religion, but that they're doing that for more ideological reasons.
Okay. Well,
but a lot of them are Muslims. A lot of them are fervent Muslims, and Muslims do believe in an Exodus.
Gotcha. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, and I want to get to the audience questions. If you're open to starting that now.
I'm open to it.
Awesome. So, let's see. We got Bradley Wistance asks, how does Dr. Falk assess the common scholarly theory that the Israelites emerged peacefully from Canaan?
Well, again, that sort of begs the question of, well, where did they come from? Now, the whole idea that they emerged peacefully from Canaan has to be reconciled with other pieces of evidence. For example, the destruction of Jericho, the destruction of Hatzor, the fact that we find them in, say, more of an area that would be, say, the Judean foothills early on in their history. The transition of, say, dietary practices in Canaan during the late Bronze Age, because even at sacrificial sites, we start seeing in the late Bronze Age a transition from, say, donkey and pig and dog sacrifices to, say, more kosher kind of sacrifices like bull and sheep, goat and and deer.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to account for that too. So I think that the whole peaceful rising up, or the peaceful infiltration hypothesis, I think has some challenges to negotiate. I think there comes a cognitive weight that comes with those theories that I think is not the best explanation.
Gotcha. Okay. Next question I got, let's see. Dylan asks, didn't the Israelites leave Ramses towards Sukkoth and went through the wilderness in order to avoid war?
They did. They did go through Sukkoth, and they were intending to. That's the reason. The reason they avoided war is after they went up north, which would have been, say, towards the Way of Horus, the way to the land of the Philistines. They actually go south, which is they do avoid the way of the Philistines. They don't take that route. There were two common routes that were, say, popular in the late Bronze Age to travel to Canaan. Mm-hmm. One was the Way of Horus, which was a string of fortresses across the North Sinai that led to the Philistine Decapolis. Mm-hmm. And that would have been war all the way. Okay. So that's what that text is talking about. The other common route was the Way of Shur, which was sort of cut across the Sinai, but there's very little water there. It was infamous for being, say, high desert, very dry, not a lot of wells. So you could not have supported a large population migrating across the Way of Shur. So they take a completely different route. That's why they go south after they cross the Sea of Reeds, to avoid the way of the path of the Philistines.
Okay. Another one is, who are the Shasu of Yahweh? Are they connected to the Israelites?
Okay, the problem with the Shasu of Yahweh is there's a couple of problems with it. We find the reference in the Temple of Amenhotep III at Soleb. But what we find with it is it's actually the Shasu of Yahu. So it's not quite Yahweh, it's Yahu. Mm-hmm. Now, we're not sure, because all we have is a name in a captive circle. Mm-hmm. Is Yahu a place? Is it the name of a deity? We're not sure. We are sure that the Shasu originated long before Amenhotep III. The Shasu make their first appearance during the reign of Thutmose II in Egyptian texts. So that's quite early in the 18th dynasty.
Okay. Let's see. Here's a good one. It was actually a question I wanted to ask in my original line of questions. Why do you view the Ipuwer Papyrus as an allusion to the Exodus rather than it contradicting the Exodus account?
Okay, it doesn't contradict the Exodus account. It demonstrates events that will be later, say, reinterpreted during the Exodus.
Okay.
There are some very strange things that we do find in the Ipuwer Papyrus that we do find in the Exodus account.
Okay.
Like, for example, the river turning into blood is not actually the strangest thing in there. The strangest thing in there is that they drink from the Nile. Anyway, because your typical Egyptians didn't drink from the Nile. Mm-hmm. Because very early on, the Egyptians noticed that people who drank from the Nile were sicker than people who drank from wells, who were then sicker than those who drank beer. Mm-hmm. So beer in ancient Egypt was your water purification system. It wasn't to get drunk. You didn't get drunk on beer. Because it was very low alcohol, about 3%.
Okay.
So very light beer. But people used to drink exclusively beer back then if they could afford it.
Gotcha.
Because you ended up being healthier for drinking that beer. Now, with the plagues, what we start seeing is that when the river was turned into blood, it not only contaminated the river, it contained all the drinking vessels of stone and wood, including the pots of beer, making them undrinkable, making the wells undrinkable. Everything was undrinkable.
Huh.
So people were digging holes beside the river and drinking that, hoping for natural purification.
Interesting.
So we do have these really, really interesting details that resonate from, say, Ipuwer. But the problem with the Ipuwer text is it's unmistakably Middle Kingdom. It's unmistakably 12th dynasty.
Okay.
And it's unmistakably so because of its grammar, because of its diction. It's written in a phase of the Egyptian language that's very distinct. So there's really no mistaking it for, say, a later text.
Interesting. Okay.
So we do have to deal with that issue, that even though it looks very attractive, and frankly, many of the prophecies of that period look that attractive. I mean, even Nefertiti does, to be honest. But we also have to realize that Semites in Egypt were a perennial thing. They had been there since early Dynasty 11.
Okay. Let's see. Probably fit one or two more in here. Oracle asks, who are the Sea People?
Who are the Sea People? The Sea People are tribes of Indo-Europeans from Anatolia.
Okay.
So they are amongst them are the Philistines, the Sheruhen, and other tribes of these Anatolians that had migrated down what's called the coastal plain of Canaan. It's very interesting because the Sea People, we're first told about the Sea People during their invasion during the last couple of years. I think it's the last few years of Ramses III. There's even an invasion earlier on in his reign too. I think it's the 5th and 11th year or something like that. But the Sea Peoples have already established themselves in the 1170s, well already into Canaan, by the time they had attempted their invasion of, say, the fortresses along the path of the Road of Horus. So the Sea Peoples are actually doing not an aquatic, but a naval invasion of those fortresses. They don't take the road; they come in by boat.
Okay.
So they attempt a naval invasion of those fortresses. So they have already established themselves in towns in Canaan by that point. So this is very interesting because as the Israelites are sort of doing their incursion in the Judean foothills from the east, the Philistines are taking the coastal plain on the west. And they're more or less dividing the land between themselves. This plays out later on, actually, during the reign of King David, where we have, say, the wars between the Israelites and the Philistines. They're fighting over the Shephelah, which is this fertile valley between the two areas. So it's an agricultural war.
Okay. How much time do you have left?
I can go for another hour.
Well, I want to give you some time between this one and your stream with Sentinel. So let's do a few more questions, and then I want to just remind people of your fundraiser that we're going to be doing as well. Okay?
Okay.
So this one's a little bit longer. Oracle asks another question. He goes, Falk, you said that they were Israelites, that the Israelites treaded... I'm sorry, let me start that over. Falk, you said that where the Israelites treaded would not have been a desert, but then you stated it was, and that they were luring Pharaoh. So was it a desert? Was it 40 years?
It's partially, it's a desert. The northern area was desert. Was desert. The southern part wasn't.
Okay.
It was savanna.
Okay.
Okay. And that has to do with the whole weather patterns of the late Bronze Age.
Okay.
Okay. So the Way of Shur would have been almost certainly a desert.
Okay.
The desert Zin, which is basically on the northern, western, sort of mid area of the Sinai, would have been a desert.
Okay.
But once you start getting down into the more southern regions of the Sinai, you start hitting grasslands and savanna.
Okay. So then another follow-up question to that was it 40 years or just like a long time?
Probably just a long time.
Okay.
The whole problem with 40 years is it is a well-recognized euphemism for an unspecified long time, and it was used all over the ancient Near East.
Okay.
At least from, say, the Levant and Syria all the way down to Egypt, it was used.
Okay.
When you get into Mesopotamia, they use a different euphemism. They use 60.
Okay. And then the last part of his question, because there's a lot of parts to it, was why would anybody who follows the Bible accept this narrative?
Why anyone would follow which narrative?
The explanation that you're positing, I guess.
Mean about the... Could you be more specific?
Yeah, I'll ask. Let's table that for a little bit, and
okay.
I guess let's.
If you can be more specific, I can answer that more readily.
Oracle in the chat.
That's an awful broad question.
Yeah. So Oracle in the chat.
Why would anyone want to accept your idea of Western civilization?
Yeah, fair enough. So let's skip to a different question until we get something a little bit more
tangible, concrete.
Yeah. So Dave Warren asks. Your explanation of those who followed Moses out of Egypt is that the Amorites and others followed Moses. Why don't you think that Jacob and his descendants followed Moses out of Egypt through like the Genesis account?
Well, they did.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I mean it is the descendants of Jacob.
Okay.
But it's also a mixed multitude. It's both. We're basically told in the biblical texts that when the sons of Jacob and their families left, a mixed multitude followed them.
Okay.
And that mixed multitude is a multicultural mix of people.
Okay.
So it's both.
Gotcha.
But the question then is, where did the mixed multitude go? They didn't just die in the desert.
Yeah.
They did eventually, but they were grafted into the tribes.
Okay. Interesting. Awesome. Well, it looks like nobody else is asking any more questions here. So I'm going to, I guess, give you some time back in your day. Before we end the stream, do you want to talk about your work that you're doing right now on the historicity of the plagues? And
yes, one of the things I am hoping to do is another book. Now, I've already written a book on the Ark of the Covenant and its context in ancient Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to do a book looking a little further back, looking at the plagues of Egypt and looking at them in the way that they would have been perceived by an Egyptian.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not a lot of work has been done in this field. We have a lot of biblical exegesis, and we have some sort of some theories that float out there that don't really hold together when really closely examined. Such, for example, that each plague was an assault on a god of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very common interpretation, but it falls apart really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a better approach we can take by actually looking at what the Egyptians thought about these sorts of events, what they thought about plagues, what they thought about water magic, what they thought about, say, water purification, the turning into blood. What did the locusts mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what did these plagues mean to the Egyptians? Because it's ultimately the plagues affected the average Egyptian. Yes, they were judgments upon the rulers of Egypt, but they were also a judgment that was meant to send a message to the people of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's very, very important to look at it from that point of view, because that's going to tell us a lot of stuff about the plagues that we wouldn't expect to find normally.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So I would like to make this a book-length work, but to do a book-length work takes a lot of free time.
Yep.
And in order to have that free time, I need to have the living expenses that I don't have to work a minimum wage job to pay the rent.
Yep. And so this is where any of you guys that are be watching this, I have a link in the description right now for Dr. Dave Falk's GoFundMe for this project. If you want to help him out to achieve this, just go to that GoFundMe and donate any amount. I'm sure Dr. Falk would appreciate that greatly.
Any amount would be appreciated.
Yep. And so, yeah, do you have anything else you want to say before we end the stream here?
I would invite all your users to have a look at my YouTube channel.
YouTube channel, yep.
That's free. Not for me personally. Yep. But they might get something out of that. The whole channel is dedicated to talking about ancient Egypt and the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we talk just about ancient Egypt. Sometimes we talk about just the Bible. And sometimes we talk about how the two interrelate. And there's a lot to talk about there.
Yep.
So I'm sure a lot of your subscribers would really enjoy seeing that.
Yes. And also his YouTube channel will be in the description, you guys. So please go give him a sub or a follow, whatever it's called. And please go support him. So, well, I really appreciate you taking the time to get on here. And I'll catch all of you guys later. Thanks again for tuning in.